Okay, we are broadcasting all by myself here. Let's put up the clickety-clack one. Whoops, I just suddenly goofed. And let's try again. The dangers of hitting the wrong button. Here we go. Infinite regress. There. Should have hit this. And click ratchet. One of these days we'll get a platform that'll allow you to hear ratchet along. And there's Peter's wonderful little paradise, is the methodology of creationism. Also, you could call it TIP for short. And tortucan.wordpress.com, my website. If you don't have that on your little speed access, that's where I welcome comments there. And all the material there is there for free sharing, like I'm about to not do anymore on this opening, as I gradually shut down my material for video feeds. Away we go. Fino says, sounds pretty political for a science stream. Well, today, yeah, we've got some side issues, but believe it or not, it's all about evolution. And we'll be covering all of that accordingly. Right off the bat, we're still doing the continuing installments of Contested Bones, Rupe Sanford's creationist book that was given to me as a gift to analyze, since the person who had heard about it said, I don't have time to do that. Would you like to do that? Sure, and sent it to me. We finally finished the Homo erectus chapter. Bye-bye, Homo erectus. Where their upshot is they're contending that Homo erectus are just slightly deformed people, like pygmies, maybe. In fact, that was the last argument that they were making in that particular chapter, that because pygmies are small and they have restricted diet, and therefore that's the reason why their brains are smaller, and that explains why Homo erectus is what it is. Never mind the fact that there's a massive anatomy that puts Homo erectus not quite on the human map in terms of the way the skulls and the way the bones and stuff are laid out there. Almost. The gnat's eyelash, because of course they're the ancestral group, if not their species specifically, perhaps any of the other ones that have been identified since then, but damn close. And one of the things that, of course, my argument is, it's all about the source methods, and that you can't arrive at a legitimate conclusion if your source methods are bad. And I've been putting up linkages to some of the papers that they've been cited. There's more to just than the ones that I've put up, because not all the stuff is available open access. And I want everybody to have the material open access so they can read the original source citations and look it up on their own. They can compare my view with all the rest. Anyway, one of the cute little things that popped up, I will try to focus in on here. We got a little thing on here up there about wood, about woodworking, and it was notes 99 and 100, which I didn't put the linkages up to, but it turned out to be a paper by Dominguez Rodrigo, which isn't available open access, unfortunately, so that's why I didn't put a link up. Woodworking activities by early humans, a plant residue analysis on Herculean stone tools from Tanzania. And the fun part was that both of those notes are to the same paper, same page numbers, everything. And that's not right. That's double dipping. Just for a single word, woodworking. How is one paper telling you more about the woodworking separately from the same paper telling about the woodworking? Well, by woodworking, what it turned out to be, because I did obtain access through surreptitious means, the full text of the thing, had to do with the fact that the Homo erectus made spears. They're at the early stages of that. They've got indications about the wear and plant material that are found in some of these stone tool edges that indicates that that's what they're using them for. They're extremely basic, perfectly understandable tools that the Homo erectus have been working on for a really long time. And when you looked at all of that, lumping this all together under woodworking, as though they're making little wood figurines like my little chess sets and all the other stuff, is not quite the implication that you wanted to do. It's misrepresenting the source material. And also to use the same source twice for as though they're independent. No, one footnote would have sufficed. To put a second one up means that Rupe is stuttering in his brain. It's hard to tell. Well, I see we got some side discussions going in here about toxic waste and sludge and fungi. I'm not entirely sure what that's going on, but it does bring us to Dinesh D'Souza, which we'll get to later in the show. Anyway, the linkages that I did put up on the Homo erectus matter about cooking and some of these other side issues had to do with, I kind of wanted to let everyone read the stuff that our pals at the creationist community were citing as though it meant a lot more than what it did. They're trying to give the impression that art and figurine making that are human in nature are occurring in Homo erectus. And the one paper that they link to on that is available, open access, no pictures at all except one or two that don't exactly support that. The idea that Homo erectus was starting to make very, very rudimentary kind of imagery, even like scraping their hands along clay. There's various things that are suggestive that they're starting to develop external conceptuality. We don't know diddly squat about their language. No Homo erecti currently exist. We don't have the genes of Homo erectus because they're so far back that you don't have full genetic information, unlike what we do have with the Denisovans and the Neanderthals. So we can actually poke around and find out what genes they have and draw implications from those. So it's a very rudimentary argument that the creationists are trying to do, and very dogmatic. So I put those little papers up, and you can follow those up on there. The other parts of the show maybe are going to take up a little more time, so I'll kind of get on to that right in here. But I will give you a little prescience of what's going on in the later chapters with Rupe and Sanford. The next one's going to be on Homo floresiensis, which is the little hobbit. That's clearly where we'll be talking about alimentary, the issues of scaling as to whether or not floresiensis is actually a remnant Homo erectus population or just an extremely oddly dwarf microcephalic version of human beings. And there's been a lot of up and down and in and out about that. And I've already spotted at least one major technical paper that they didn't manage to hit. And some of the other stuff is more recent. They've got stuff all the way up to 2017. So how did they miss these other things? So anyway, I'll be getting into that in future. And I've already alluded to some of the upcoming attractions that will be, as I get into some of these later chapters on Homo habilis and that, where some online creationist that's been haranguing the YouTube comments actually inadvertently prodded me to investigate further. He was quote mining. His idea of showing me evidence was to quote stuff from Rupe and Sanford and quote authority quotes, and that's missing the whole point on it. Oh, yes, Animal says, RJ, you got it right. Why were we talking about slime or sludge? I suppose one could bring up slime and sludge in several contexts. Creationists like to use it as a trope that human evolutionists think that we came from slime or rocks. That's a Kent Hovind favorite, but yeah, not quite. Although there's slime, as in the little slime molds, are actually quite fascinating little critters with their own particular lifestyle, and they're really quite interesting. And there's a lot of technical literature on that, but they're at best only distant cousins to us, and so we never invite them over for dinner, and we're terribly offended about them if they don't bring a cup of tea or a good wine bottle with them when they show up, and so we don't really deal with the slime very much. Sludge is more evocative of the stuff that comes out of a factory that's improperly regulated for environmental rules. So that kind of brings into the kind of political circumstances. And Fino says, herbicides kill pestilent herbs, pesticides kill parasitical bugs, woodicides, you get the picture. Yeah, we've got a whole ecosystem here. And it's been a debate that's been going on for as long as I've been around, which is to what extent do we want to use chemistry and science knowledge to make life more convenient for us or for the farm animals and plants we grow, and therefore if bugs come in and want to eat the things, is that kind of a nuisance and a problem? And to what extent are we creating an artificial ecosystem that now has side effects that maybe we didn't want to have? On the one hand, my mom, who died about 10 years ago and was born in 1910, so that gives you an idea about how far back that memory goes. She can easily remember when they would buy fresh produce from the store that they would have to go through and pick out the bugs and stuff in the lettuce. Could you imagine the conniption fits if that was a common practice today? We're so used to packaged up lettuce and stuff that occasionally when you get some problems with E. coli on them, it makes the news. But the idea that you would have had to have physically washed everything to clean it off before you make use of it. We've never lived in an environment. No, young people have never experienced an environment, at least in an industrialized country, where they have to bother about that. On the other hand, all those pesticides and the fertilizers that we use wash into the streams. They get into a thing where different algae blooms and other factors come up. So it's a big ecological issue. And I'm not one of these who say that the genetically engineered crops are intrinsically bad, or that we should never use pesticides or any others. But ideally, what you want to have is an ecologically friendly system that doesn't produce unpleasant side effects and that yet still yields the kinds of food products that we're used to in the 21st century. We'll still work it out, and we're reasonably clever as well as being incredibly stupid as a species. And so let's see what we can do. Fino says, RJ, please, since when do you kill Dinesh Brand Wu with chemistry? Oh, well, it won't be quite chemistry we'll be dealing with. It will be climatology, though, and I'll have some show and tells to put up. Hopefully, my feed won't get too pushy because of the fact that I'm using very limited technology here, and occasionally there's some bleed outs with the sound and all that. I found out it's one of the reasons why I try to shut everything off. I eliminate Twitter and all these other things. And I suppose, in fact, I forgot to do that this time around. Let me quickly exit some of these side menus that apparently I understand I'd never noticed were actually operating invisibly in the background and are therefore clogging up my video that I may not even realize it. So these are some of the fun and games that pop up that it's still a technological novice in many ways. As you can tell from looking at me, I'm not a young person. So I'm from an age in which a lot of this computer technology are oh dear, I hit the wrong little thing down in here. Now it's going to drop me off. I'll let it finish its little tasks in there. Anyway, I cleaned some of my little doodads up. We'll continue on with the project. Anyway, I do like to kind of keep up with current events that pop up and things that occur that are related to creation evolution issues and the byproduct of the methodological issue, which is how do you construct an argument? What sources do you rely on? Creationism is a croco squirrel. I was going to have him in here. Let me be a horribly blunt and dangerous person and just put it in the live feed. And remember that if anybody decides to jump in and make a nuisance, I control the damn room, so I can drop you out. So nice people are welcome, and people who are can behave. Although at times, croco squirrel is a feisty one, but nevertheless, it's fun to have a little feedback on the thing. So we'll see if he pops up. Anyway. Just yesterday, Dinesh D'Souza, for those, one of the people in the audience in the live feed had never actually heard much about Lord Croco Squirrel, or I mean about Dinesh D'Souza. And so I'll give you a brief description of it. Dinesh is a sanctimonious jerk who is a right-wing ideologue, has kind of a nebbish patrician appearance to him. He's a darling of the Trumplandia set. He's written quite a lot of diatribe books, highly political, arguing that Obama is the spawn of evil, and he's constantly railing on about Joe Soros and George Soros and the Clintons and all of that. And so if you think of Rosanne Barr and Cube, all of those obsessions, that's kind of gives you an idea. He's not quite in Croco Squirrel. Hello.
Hello, give me a second here. I got to kill something.
Yeah, yes, you better go on mute for a while. We're getting a lot of feedback here.
Whoops, sorry about that. And
usually I've got my screen on.
Usually I would have paused it before now. My bad.
Yeah, okie dokie. Yeah, it makes us sound so professional. Anyway, I bumped into Dinesh D'Souza quite a long time ago, and by this I mean the 1990s. Because I was monitoring the issue that I'd already begun to spot in my analysis of creationism that eventually led to the TIP project in the years to come, that anti-evolutionists tended to be really conservative. I mean, really conservative, that they were moving from kind of what at the time was still mainstream Republicans all the way out to John Birch Society on steroid dominionism versions. And so I began to think, was it just an intrinsic feature? I'm in many respects politically conservative in a lot of my viewpoints, and have voted Republicans. I shock some of my friends today when I said I voted for Reagan both times. And they just can't imagine how that happened. P.C. Myers had a look like I just hit him with a flounder when I said that. And I'll have to go into that sometime in futures and the memoirs if I live long enough. But the point was that was it an automatic thing that being politically conservative tended to lead you into an anti-evolutionism, or was there a distinctive element to it? So I began to monitor a lot of the pundits that were knocking around, and that included Ann Coulter. It included Rush Limbaugh and Michael Savage and Jay Sekulow and a lot. And I already knew about George Will, who's still doddering around to this day, that he was politically conservative, but he wasn't an anti-evolutionist. Turns out he's not religious either. And so eventually I began to delineate the dynamic factors. And what turned out to be not an absolute universal, but so close to one that it functions that way, is that to be an anti-evolution means you're a culture camp conservative religious person. By culture camp, I mean culture war. You have this hobby horse that you're going after, that this society is going to hell in a handbasket, and it's all due to the ones on the other side, the liberals that are making things terrible, and the atheists that are making things terrible. And so if you look at the vice president, Pence, he's a typical culture camp conservative religious type of the demographic. And Dinesh popped up finally more on the scope. With his book, Why is Christianity So Great? Something like that. It's in my bibliography. I think it came out like 2006. And it slid onto the anti-evolution bandwagon to some extent, basically troping a lot of intelligent design tropes, and at a very, very superficial level. But he'd also occasionally later in other things kind of criticized intelligent design. So he's just wiffle-waffly on it. I don't think he really ponders about therapsids and trilobite phylogeny in his daily thinking. But one of the other components, let me put in some, let's find out what's going on in the live feed. That's another advantage. Croco Squirrel, I could hope you will keep an eye on the live feed for me, because I tend to talk on here, and that way somebody else can take a look at it. Fino asked, who was Reagan's opponent? It was Carter the first time around and Mondale the second. I see some people have put up the thing. Dukakis was later on. That was against Bush. And Dukakis didn't look good in a tank, I can tell you that. Anyway,
Dukakis was his own group of problems. If I remember correctly, Dukakis ran against Bush the first, and
I voted for Bush in '88. Although I didn't see the conventions in '88. I was on a trip, and I had the sneaking suspicion, had I seen Pat Buchanan's speech at the '88 convention that I learned about later, and seen how the Republican Party was imploding, or the beginning of the implosion into the modern culture camp, narrow right-wing creationist party that it is now, I might have been more of a hold-my-nose guy.
They finally named that the Tea Party and went batshit.
That, of course, was fairly recent, around the turn of the century, this century.
Well, we're talking, the first reference I heard to them wanting to put together an ultra-conservative Tea Party thing was in 1987.
It is true that the roots of the modern hyper-conservatives, those go back to at least that far. Ralph Reed, they were making a direct political agenda approach and looking at it from the grassroots rather than necessarily at the top. So it took an awful long time for this stuff to percolate up to where it was really being noticed at the presidential level. This stuff had been going on at the state level, where the Republicans were increasingly becoming culture camp. So sorry about the digression into the world of politics, but you got to pay attention to that in order to understand the worldview that these people are coming from. Anyway, back to Dinesh. So I started taking note of Dinesh and looking at some of his books in the early 21st century, and went through his book on Christianity. In fact, I did a video where I pointed out about his weird views, that he thought the Spanish Inquisition really wasn't so bad after all. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That one. I missed
Oh,
that.
yeah. Yeah. His
On the other
argument,
hand,
I'll give you a brief reprise of it, because this is the sort of thing where you're going, and also was revealing a lot about his source methods. Is his position was that everybody had overestimated how many people got killed in the Inquisition. It was only a few thousand people over a couple hundred years, and that they weren't targeting Jews. It wasn't that. So all of these bad rap that the Inquisition was given were a bad thing. Well, I'm a source methods guy by then, and so I'm looking up where is he getting this source from. And it turns out it was one source, Henry Cayman's book on the Spanish Inquisition. And so I happened to find that at the library and checked that out and read it. And it's really a good book. And I recommend that Dinesh read it sometime because it didn't claim quite what he said it did. The
of course
the
not.
um, the numbers value was a partial truth. It was a half truth. It was the case that people tended to guesstimate how many people got killed in the Inquisition. They said the same thing for witchcraft trials. Sometimes you would have people saying a million witches got killed during the period. Yeah, I don't know. And it
Not
was
that
hard
many
to track.
here in the U.S.
Eh,
anyway,
yeah, and
or what
in
would become the U.S.
hmm?
or what would actually, more appropriately, what would become the U.S. eventually. A million witches, not there weren't nearly that many.
Well,
There were,
they weren't talking the European witch trials, not the Salem witch trials. That was just a handful.
it still wouldn't have been
And
possible
but
because
it
the
at any
people at that point would have been probably about 10 to 15% of the Europe's real population, and that would have been too much of a loss.
Yeah, well, there weren't that many witches at any time. But the point is about the thing is that a lot of people just guesstimated stuff, particularly in the 50s and 60s. And what Cayman did with the Spanish Inquisition was very meticulous because there were actual records in the old Spanish court data as to how many people got hauled in at the Inquisition and how many got burned. And by the way, burning was the required thing, which we'll kind of get to in a minute. But he discovered that over about a 300-year period, it was about 3,000 people that had gotten killed. And that was way below a lot of the estimates that were being bandied about of tens of thousands of people in just the Spanish Inquisition. Of course, he wasn't referring to the Italian Inquisition or any of the other Inquisition things that were going on, or the 30 Years' War, where a whole bunch of people got killed in that little mess. But the thing was, yes, that's a half truth. But the problem is it was only a half truth, because the implication was that this was kind of the upper boundary layer of their death toll, that, they killed 3,000 people. Would they have wanted to kill more? It turns out, oh yeah, because the Inquisition was really inefficient, incredibly inefficient. It was underfunded, understaffed, clumsy. And so there were people, for example, that were living near the border, and they heard about through the grapevine that there had just been a blanket request for 3,000 people to be called in for the Inquisition. And they all just left town. Whoop! By the time the Inquisition actually showed up, they just moved across the border to Portugal. So it was fabulously inefficient. The idea that all those 3,000 were the upper boundary layer of who they wanted to kill off was just nonsense. And so that was his first piece of dissembling. The other, though, was the notion about the targeting Jews. And here he was playing a super duper Parsi game, or he didn't realize he was, is that technically speaking, there were very few Jews in Spain by the time the Inquisition was running, because it wasn't that it was illegal to be a Jew or a Muslim. It just is you were just shit if you were. You couldn't hold any positions in government. You would be there would be very little opportunity for education, so that there had been a tremendous move for Jews to convert to Christianity, and they had a special name for them, conversos. Ta-da! And they discovered by the time the Spanish Inquisition really started to get into high gear here, that there were an awful lot of conversos that had risen to very prominent positions in the Spanish monarchy. And so all the ones who were chip on their shoulders racists, and you have to remember how incredibly stratified the Spanish culture was. I remember just as a kid when I was learning about the thing in grade school, that if you were a Spanish aristocrat and you had a child in Madrid, and you then took your family to serve as a minister or a governor in Mexico, and you had a second child born in Mexico City. The second child in Mexico City was a lower status than the one born in Madrid.
Of course.
So, yeah, this was so pecking order-ish that I thought, wow, that's weird. So the idea was that there were a lot of people and this was documented very carefully in Kamen's book that I would recommend Dinesh read sometime, that how the envy of these non-conversos over these uppity ex-Jews, sometimes they were a couple generations back, that meant that the Spanish Inquisition was starting to look at them and said, these aren't real Christians. That guy that's doing so well in court, I bet he's a secret Jew. Feed him some pork. Let's find out whether or not they're circumcised. Let's find out if they're real Christians or not. It was just like that. And so when you looked at the actual targeting, almost exclusively the Inquisition targeted conversos. And so the idea that this wasn't targeting Jews is just twaddle, in the same way that saying that the Nazis weren't targeting Jews because, well, not all of them were people who were practicing Jews. Some of them were like second or third generation Jews. And so they're not, you'd be accused of nuttery to miss that point. In fact, one of the things that stood out is that the only time that the Inquisition actually targeted non-conversos was when they ran out of conversos. There was a province up in the north that they needed to kind of keep their billet full of attack, and there weren't any Jews there, and so they decided to go after some Protestants this time.
RJ?
Yeah, jump in, Lord.
Animal Man 57 asks, do you think that creationists know anything about the Great Dying? You know, the Permian mass extinction?
Oh, that's an interesting question. By and large, not, because it's not, even though everybody in the scientific community with half a brain is really familiar with it, and Michael Benton and a lot of others have done just fabulous stuff on there. There's general books on the subject, videos and shows on it. It isn't very prominent in the creationists subculture, or for that matter, intelligent design. They're obsessing about the Cambrian explosion, and they don't even really bother much about extinction at all. Even the KT, young Earth creationists will go into it because it's millions of years ago, and there seems to be a perfectly natural explanation for it, the Deccan traps and the asteroid splat at Chicxulub. And so they have a reason to do it, but intelligent design doesn't bother about it now at all. I will point out the Permian is really fun because that's the area when the therapsids are ruling the roost. Our mammal ancestors are the dominant land animals during the Permian. And so the dinosaurs are just not on the map at all. They don't show up until the late Triassic after the mass extinction. And so their little ancestors are completely to the side. The diapsids in general are kind of light players compared to the synapsids. The major herbivores and major carnivores are all synapsids that are the reptile mammal line, and they don't pay a hell of a lot of attention to that. So book plug, you'll find out a bit more about all of that in Evolution Slam Dunk, which I do on the reptile mammal transition. And I've got a posting, tip 1.2 at my website. Remember the one that I alerted you to at the beginning of the show? You just can get tip 1.2 there, which goes into mass extinction issues and the Permian extinction, which was the most severe. It was the killer. Like 95% of all the species died out during the Permian mass extinction. That's way more severe than any of the other ones. And in fact, I think the KT is like number 3. I think the Devonian or the Ordovician, one of those two actually pulls in number 2. So even though KT, I think, was like 75%, and then the Triassic, which is sort of at the cusp, I think is like 50 or 60%. Anyway, we're off on the Permian thing.
Off a little bit there, RJ. I think the KT was number 4.
Yeah, well, I got a listing of, I have a thing broken down by both species and genera and family, I think, that weight the different mass extinctions in the chart that you can see also. I'm just running off my memory here, which is another reason why I go to the damn website, download the damn PDF, and you'll see my position directly on it. So it's got some charts and stuff even in it, so you can take a look at all of that. And I update that fairly regularly, that any of the material that pops up, there are things about the PT, although I haven't reposted it at the main website yet, but the Paleocene climate minimum thing that occurred, the PTEM or PETM, one of the two, thermal maximum, is a weird little spot that occurs in the climate blipping, and that connects up to eventually another issue, which is climate change, which brings us back to Dinesh D'Souza. See, so the thing that really fascinated me as I began, when I got onto Twitter with the goal of kind of learning stuff and connecting up with any of the major creationists that were on Twitter and making their life as miserable as possible. Also, I took a look at some of these pundits that I've been following. So I follow Ann Coulter on Twitter, and I follow Dinesh D'Souza, and they could block me if they feel like it. It's in their power to do so. And once in a while, Dinesh has actually even responded to me. Not very good, but nevertheless, he hasn't really dealt with the issues in question. But anyway, one of the things that he has avoided diving into at the substantive level is his obsessions on climate change, because it's part of that anti-evolution conservative Christian subculture that environmentalism is bad and the nasty leftists, and there's always a certain patina of things to it, because there have been a lot of left-wing environmentalists, and Paul Ehrlich has his own axis to grind, and there's a whole bunch of things. And of course, Al Gore becomes the poster child here because he does videos and blah blah blah. And they go on and off about that. But there's a whole technical literature, independent of any of those, on climate change issues, and Dinesh doesn't know diddly squat about them. And he's popped up. I also had done an earlier video where he had linked to a Heartland Institute flack who had put up a posting at that noted science magazine, Forbes, where he had just shot his foot off with a stupid statement about NASA technical literature that NASA immediately
Forbes doesn't like fact check or nothing.
Yeah, he doesn't. Dinesh never fact checks a damn thing.
No, I'm talking about Forbes.
Oh, well, yeah. Well, they've got good people and bad people and up people and down people on it. But the point is, it's not a technical journal. And you would never, this one, in fact, blew up in Forbes's face the moment it was posted. I mean, literally, back in 2015. So the idea that Dinesh was trotting this out just last year is an indication that he doesn't bother to look up the provenance of stuff. Well, he did it again. And so he linked to this thing from this Investors Daily, another science source, that itself was linking to another one of its own editorials that linked to. So I put a bunch of the linkages to not only the editorials, but the technical papers that eventually were being responded to on it. And it had to do with the main claim was about the idea that there's from February of 2018 back to February of such and so, the temperatures have actually been dropping, and that this is repudiating the climate change and all that. Well, the guy that was making the main claim, riffing off of the NASA data, supposedly, this Aaron Brown, who's not a climatologist, he himself acknowledged that, no, this doesn't repudiate climate change. So, and this was even quoted in the secondary editorial that Dinesh D'Souza was linking from. So that there was just this, like, do you really want to go here, Dinesh? But the main thing is I was, well, because he's an idiot. Anyway, or gets a Tortugan alert. So I was tracking all this material down, and I put the links up to the various stuff and the sublinks and that. But I have it's the original NASA material that's terribly relevant, because I can't figure out how this guy Brown came to the conclusion that he did. So I put some show and tell up, and hopefully it won't have affected my feed to where I'm getting any bleed outs or anything. We'll go into the infinite regress mode here again, and whoop. And then we'll put this up on big screen. And so hope everybody can see this. You see the cute little red chart? Now, this is actually a chart that's up at the NASA site. And I put the linkage up to it so everybody can check it out for themselves. The 12-month global mean versus 1951, 1980. Well, to realize what the hell this is not a temperature chart. This is a chart of the deviations from the mean over time. And so the 0 point over here would be that 1951 to 1980 average. And so the global mean temperature is either below that 1951, 1980 down to 0.5, or above, as in 0.5 and 1.0. And so what it is you can see that temperatures, the global means tended to be a little below that average going back way to the 1880s. And then starting around in here, you can see 1940 on through to about 1980. It's kind of oscillating around the average of that. But you'll know what happens after 1980 is those means tend to get higher and higher and higher in terms of how much they're deviating from that temperature. Remember, this is not the temperature itself, but the deviation from it. And you'll notice here more recently, there's a big drop in the mean deviation. That may be what kind of got him to thinking, if he was misinterpreting stuff like this as a temperature measurement, as opposed to changes in the means, that might be an indication of it. So that was one of the first charts that I was looking at. You wanted to have some comments there, Croc?
Yep. Animal Man, again, says we could beat the Permian mass extinction in terms of horribleness and speed. We don't stop all the environmental destruction now. And he says he's not exaggerating. He's probably not. I mean, we could.
We're artificially generating. The interesting thing about what happens with the mass extinction issue. I'll keep this next chart that's going to be on the seasonal cycle. I'll be discussing shortly, but you can let it drink in while we're talking. The interesting reason why. Understanding why mass extinctions occur has a bunch of different issues. In terms of creationism and intelligent design, it's why the hell do things fall apart? If everything is a theocratically designed theme park of wonderful, finely tuned systems, how the hell does it fall apart so spectacularly? And why does it take so long to refill the bathtub? Why is it an enormously long time frame in order to be able to generate the replacement models? And that's a point that either creationists, who of course are trying to cram everything into the flood, and the intelligent designers who theoretically accept a long-term time frame, don't really think too much about. Now, some of the things are the idea that there are keystone species, that there are particular species that are interconnected in networks of ecological relationship as predator-prey and parasite relationships, and that when they go, they take everything with them, because suddenly they break the whole chain down. And the reason why the dinosaur one is fascinating is that there is reason to suspect that there had been stress on the ecosystem for quite some time. The marine ecosystem breaks down before the terrestrial ones do. So your plesiosaurs and bunch are starting to disappear before you bump into the dinosaur extinction. And that this is probably related more so to the Deccan traps with the sulfur dioxide and carbon dioxide that's being thrown out for years, millions of years in the Deccan traps. It's a colossally powerful volcanic eruption. Just imagine thousands of Hawaiis running off continuously for hundreds of thousands of years, and you get some idea of how that's affecting stuff. And the idea that we could be artificially generating these keystone species breakdowns in the way we're doing monocultures, in which we're breaking down ecosystems and chopping down trees, and of course climate change through global warming and all these other things, that the paleoecologist and the modern ecologist and climate scientists pay attention to this stuff. I think the jury is still out as to how potentially catastrophic things are on, but like one climatologist said, what we're doing is like bungee jumping off of a roller coaster. It's not that the roller coaster is not a fixed thing with up and down climate change. It's that the bungee jumping is not going to be easy to tell you where you're going to land. And so this is probably not a good idea to be too fruitful about this. Anyway, let me get back then to this chart. Now, if there's something that should stand out like a sore thumb about this, is that January tends to be cold, and July, August tends to be warm, and then November, December tends to be cold. Duh. So what you have is a seasonal cycle, la, 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 every single time, blah, blah, blah. And what you can see is they put from 1880, 1900, 1920, different color codings of the things. And you'll notice that the bluish are on the bottom, old, and the greenish are in the middle, and then the rusty colors are above them, and the orangey stuff up on the top. Now, you'll notice an individual one, like one of these can come across down here, well down into the lower level, and probably is over here, down in here. This means that you have overlaps. You have cycles, sunspot cycles, that are oscillating over an 11-year cycle. You've got longer-term cycles from the Milankovitch cycles that are way too long for this sort of thing. You have bursts from volcanoes that can upset things. Pinatubo, the ash can cool stuff off. But overall, the seasonal cycles have shown a general warming in terms of these anomaly differences between the standard cycle at 0 and up above, up below. So the reason why I put these up, they're nice graphical indications of the fact that individual bits, one February to another, can tell you the little micro details about where you are on the roller coaster. But it's not the same thing at all. I'll stop sharing here. Not the same thing as all as trying to imply that, well, we're actually cooling down. We're not warming up. No, the overall temperature thing, it's no doubt now at all, is we're running upstream. I can see my face on the screen now, again, now that I stopped the screen sharing. The easiest way to visualize this in your head is to have a cycle that's doing its little trick. Goody gumdrops. And you got the winter, summer cycles going along. And normally, it's not necessarily rising over time. Ideally, you could have really long-term cycles where you have the little oscillation and it goes up and down over tens of thousands of years, or even over shorter cycles where there's a little bit of nudging because of the solar cycle, a little more sun time there, a little less sunlight there, and the fact that whether or not it's occurring with the northern or southern hemisphere in the longer cycle. At the moment, we're closest to the sun when it's winter in the northern hemisphere. Do you notice it? That axial inclination is way more important than the distance to the sun overall. But all the climatologists pay attention to this stuff in terms of how to factor all of these factors into the data. But what we see is that winter summer oscillation is beginning to climb and climb and climb and climb. And it doesn't mean that you don't have an occasional month or an occasional year where it's bounced below at a particular moment, low as so was, never been this cold before within recent memory. You can do those things, but overall, no, we're actually getting risings on that. And so I don't know where Brown got his data field from. He did not link to a particular data set. He linked to the main website where they were telling about this is the hottest summers and hottest years we've had, and that this is a confirmation of climate change, and all of the data up there is documentary, and there's data fields that you can download. Now, if Brown ever does come up with a more detailed data set where he actually has the data that we can look at to find out how he's making these little judgments, I don't know.
That would be lovely.
See. But he didn't do it in that posting he put up that the investors linked to, that was then linked to secondarily by the investors, that was then linked to again by a tweet from Dinesh D'Souza, Mr. Climate Change Scientific Illiterate, who cannot figure out that the Spanish Inquisition was a bad idea. He's got the same bad method all the way through his methodology. He's addicted to secondary sources he doesn't fact check. Does this sound familiar from the creationism thing? He relies on people who have very limited data field that they draw off of. In the case of creationism, I'm literally measuring it. Since we've gone way past my little half hour here, I will do another cute little, I normally put in my shameless plug. We'll put my shameless plug in now. And who's which of the kids is making the cute little noises?
That would be the youngest one. That would be the coldest one.
How old is the youngest one?
He's not quite 4. And
past the terrible 2s and into the even worse 4s. Okay. These are the list of the patrons. Stephen and Dyer and Eat and Yui and Mona and Hendril and Jen and Jody and Daniel and Ralph and Eric and Benjamin and Staggles and Alex and Totes Real and Everett and Paul. Thank you all. They've done that through the Patreon account. And of course, I shoot my foot off by pointing out that Patreon is slow as molasses on actually getting money. So a few of them have in fact lowered their contributions, and I don't begrudge them that at all, because I'm not really seeing that much money on there anyway. The place to really help is still the GoFundMe. That gets stuff to me like lickety split pronto, and I could still use more. Are there really only 169 people on the planet to support that? And then of course the tortucanwordpress.com, which is still a work in progress. I've got books full of material available online on that, and all of the PDFs in there are shareable. I'm still in the process of figuring out what to do for a an improvement to the site now that I've got one of these little magic smartphone-y things that was a gift to me for Christmas. I'm realizing how awkward it is. I can see now physically why reading a PDF on a smartphone is not the funnest thing in the world. Not impossible, but it's awkward. So I'm realizing that I'm going to have to revamp the material that I put up to have a new structure for it so that it will be. I kind of tried that a little bit with this a mirror website, tortucan.com. That had stuff with a friend went through and converted the material over to HTMLs, and we were trying to figure out what we could do in terms of indexing and all that. That I could see the problems and the limitations of it. Eventually, I want the WordPress thing to have that same capability, and I'm still a stupid novice in this and have no resources, so I'm just kind of winging it on the freebie thing. So work in progress, work in progress. Anyway, oh, and Jackson Wheat, who could not be here today, he was busy. He has talked me into helping him. We'll write a book together for some potential other revenue, where we're going to rake over the coals several of the creationist answers books. He had gotten a recent example, and I have those and an earlier example, and we'll be taking on Answers in Genesis directly in that little puppy, and we've started work on that one. Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's going to be fun. He asked me to do specifically the radiometric dating chapter, and he's going to do the remaining chapters, and we'll be
following in on this. That would be hilarious.
Oh, yeah. Well, and Stu, and anybody who pops up, Jade only pops up occasionally, but I'm still wanting to harangue her because I don't think she's on Twitter, if at much at all. But anyway, she pops up once in a while, and she's got this colossal data set of works that she has accumulated over the years, and it should be available. This information should be scanned. It should be up so that the scholars can make use of all this. Otherwise, it's just material sitting around in a box where it's not helpful. And the same thing that I've been trying to do with my work is that it doesn't do diddly squat if the information isn't accessible to people. So I know Apologia makes use of my stuff, and Jackson Wheat does, and all the rest. And that's just based on the limited amount of material that I've been able to do so far.
I make use of your methods to do my own. The cosmology stuff is expanding nicely. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. It's there's so much information out there, and at the very least, the reference bibliography gives a data field to work with. I'm constantly, when I have sessions where I'm looking at somebody that I haven't heard of before, I find out if it's in my bibliography or not. And I go, oh, yeah, actually, I do have that website in there. I know about that person. And so then I can put it on the measuring plate and try to figure out where they are on that and apply that in all levels. So anyway, I put in my shameless plug, and we still haven't got to Rosanne Barr. But let me finish up on the Dinesh D'Souza end. So what the upshot of it is Dinesh has an incompetent method. It's exactly the same incompetent method as creationists are. He's not a full-blown creationist, but he thinks as badly as one. And he's addicted to secondary sources. He has a non-negotiable dogma that he wants to be true, and he only scavenged around for stuff to reinforce it. And he never defends his source material. I make it a point, too, to look at the demographics of it. Even though Dinesh tends to not respond on most things, every once in a while, some of his little supporters will dive in. And I try to find out from my tip measurement, are they anti-evolutionist and are they climate change skeptics? And almost always they are. And so this is confirming the demographics of what I could see anyway. The Trump support base is heavily weighted to culture cap conservative religious creationists. And some of them are in the cabinet, and you get a lot of that stuff. So here is where the methodology of somebody like a Dinesh D'Souza and of creationism has direct consequences, because people who think exactly like that, and we should put the think in quotation marks, are serving in the government. They're being appointed to the courts. They are in cabinet positions. They are governors. They are in state houses. They're all over the place. And they've been able to slide along like this because at the grassroots, we haven't held them to account as much as we should. We've not exposed them before they get to be in positions of power. That only once in a while do you find flaps coming up where somebody brings up questions about evolution, but often they're already running for office at that stage, or they're the nominee, or they're already in positions of power, they're already elected. And a lot of them would be elected anyway, given the demographics of their constituency. But the point is, nobody should have been able to slip through these gauntlets unnoticed. And it's up to every one of us at the grassroots to make use of these things, to work with local media. We don't have quite the problem here in Spokane, because we have, this is not although it's a conservative constituency, it's not a hotbed of creationist activism. And the same can be said for not everybody, but most people in the west side of the state that Crocus Squirrel's involved in. But the Discovery Institute is in Seattle, and you've got creationists.
Most of what we've got on my side of the state is are your Californian imports, at least anymore, and sometimes, and most of the time, they're so far to the left that anybody to the right of Hitler is, well, yeah.
Yeah. By and large, see what happens, unlike other states, or some other states, say Oklahoma, Tennessee, Arkansas, even some of the ones in the Dakotas and Pennsylvania and others, will be ones where anti-evolution legislation or equal time, student freedom of academic inquiry stuff, there's a variety of buzzwords that get used. That stuff can make it past the committee into being put forward as a regular piece of legislation a lot more often than what happens in Washington state, where it's very rare for a piece of legislation to even be proposed in committee and people just go and it never gets anywhere. So it's not a big problem here in Washington.
RJ, here's the fun part. We had a bunch of charter schools here in the state until they were declared unconstitutional or some such. Anyway, the state Supreme Court ordered them to be dismantled. This was a couple of years ago. As it turns out of, what was it, 11 or 13 of them, all but one or two were actually based entirely in creationism.
Yeah, that's true. Although there is a homeschooling movement that isn't creationist, the vast majority of the activist homeschool movement is culture camp conservative. And the Abeka and various other ones. Survey had been done, a very nice one by Zach Coplin a couple of years ago, and I had followed up on that, checking his sources to make sure he was accurate, and finding out even a little bit more about it. And so that's why when you look at the source base, anybody, even if you have a potential charter school in your own state, find out what curricula they plan to use. And if they're using stuff like Abeka or stuff that they've siphoned from the intelligent design movement or stuff that they're getting from creationists overtly, that'll show up when you start looking at the text they're using. And you want to hit that stuff before the shit hits the fan. So
of Pandas and People was actually a school textbook in a real school for a while, and it's still being used in some of the charter schools today.
Oh yeah, and full-blown creationist material pops up in a variety of stuff from Bob Jones University, and of course Abeka material, and then some of the newer squishy stuff, the intelligent design. They actually have relatively little penetration. Some of the stuff that's been put out as potential school supplements from the Discovery Institute, I don't see much of it actually being used there. So you're much more likely to have creationist stuff showing up than ID material.
We actually one of the schools here where in the city that I'm in, we had a school here. It was done entirely ham-hovened.
Oh, Kent Hovind, yeah. That's the instantaneous third rail. Kent Hovind is the Donald Trump of creationism.
No, not just Kent Hovind, Ken Ham as well.
Yeah, well, Ken Ham, believe it or not, is kind of like higher up on the intellect food chain than Kent Hovind. That's a sad measurement to make, but nevertheless,
that was the academic standard to which these people were holding.
Yeah. Anyway, so we're getting close here. Let me remember Rosanne Barr. And the reason why I was bringing her up was not just because, unless you've been living in a cave, you will probably be aware of the fact that there's a big dust up about the fact that ABC just canceled their series. It was after the season had been done. So, you know, it was not right in the middle of it. They'd already finished up for the thing. I actually haven't watched it yet. I've got it on the DVR and that. I'll look through it. It looks like most of the writing is perfectly fine and funny and clever. And that's the reason why it was doing quite well, quite independent of the Trump demographic. But Rosanne Barr is a nutball. And she is a conspiracy-minded person. She thinks that Hillary Clinton's involved in a child pornography ring. She's only one oar short of being Alex Jones in some of her weird viewpoints on stuff. And so that was more than enough reason for the dust up. But David Klinghoffer at the Discovery Institute just couldn't resist making hay on this. So right this morning, they linked to a piece. Jackson Weed has just shown up. Yeah, I'll be introducing you momentarily. We can talk about our little project that we got going. But anyway, a cute little Klinghoffer, who is a secondary redactor. He has never done original research. He just repeats the tropes that he gets from the other gang. And he's apparently an amiable fellow, but he's credulous as all get out. He decided to make the standard intelligent design trope that no evolutionist should complain about Rosanne Barr because evolutionary theory is steeped in racism. And here is a link to this video that we're doing at the Discovery Institute that is documenting that. And I'm just going facepalm, holy moly, there's the tropes again. Because this is an issue they have been mangling. It's one that actually has been found in creationist apologetics for quite some time. Not Jonathan Sarfati, the other guy that tends to do this a lot on these kind of tropes. It's not Sarfati. I've forgotten the name on. Yipes. Anyway, but anyway, the idea that evolutionary theory is inherently racist is a trope that's been running at least since the 1990s. The irony is that creationism was the place where you would get old-style Southern racism from the 1960s through to the 1970s. So they're revisionist right off the bat. I put up a mention, another reason to go to my damn website, the Planet of the Apes chapter 5 of the old tip, which is all on human evolution. And I went into Louis Agassiz and a lot of the attitudes about racism that were showing up in there. You can actually throw in chapter 6 on because the Bible tells me so, which goes into the slavery issue, and you get a lot on the racism elements in that area. And then also in tip 1.6 on the creationism rise, there's a whole section in there that I did on the 1920s racism that filters into the book that was being used in the Scopes trial, and the context of that in terms of the eugenics movement, which again has been just blown completely out of proportion. It's not that eugenics is right, it's that it was not just an evolutionary doctrine. In fact, it was ultimately a non-evolutionary doctrine. It was an old style, hereditarian view of things that got co-opted and muddled along. And ironically, the only group, literally, the only group I can find today that's keen on eugenics is the Occidental Quarterly, that's bankrolled by one of the Regnieri brothers, whose family is one of the main ones publishing the books of Dinesh D'Souza and the intelligent design movement. So,
RJ,
irony.
RJ, we got a thing here again from Animal Man. Ken Ham may be Trump of anti-evolution, but Kent Hovind is the Hillary Clinton.
Oh gosh, that's a bad analogy. Yeah, Hillary Clinton has her flaws and all that, but they're in a totally different ballpark in there in terms of the knowledge level. The thing that Kent Hovind and Ken Ham both have in common is that they are pathological secondary redactors. That is not something you could say of a policy wonk geek like the Clintons, both wife and husband. These are people that just imbibe detailed information and disgorge it at policy wonk level in a way that Donald Trump never does. And the reason why I'm making the analogy with Trump is that Trump and Kent Hovind are both people who are so far off the methods ramp that anybody who can take them seriously, you can't take them seriously by definition. When I find that somebody is trying to lecture to me about a Kent Hovind video, I go, boop, so I took an alert instantaneously. And Trump is off the scale in terms of what qualifies as a competent president and a person worthy of being. We've had scuzzbuckets as president, Harding and Nixon in their own various ways. But, Harding was a governor, and Nixon is a tragic guy because he was, in many respects, an extremely knowledgeable and brilliant and well-read man. He also was filled with paranoid delusions and some awful bad policies in a lot of areas. But they're in a different level than Donald Trump, who is profoundly ignorant and a narcissistic bully on a scale that no other president I can think of in history comes anywhere close, competent or incompetent. And that puts him off the scale. That's why I was making the comparison on here. So anyway, Jackson, hello. We'll stick on here. Hi, glad you could make it.
Hello, I believe I am fashionably late.
Yes, fashionably late. What these things can all happen on here. I'm at least I was fashionably early, getting this show going on the thing, and had enough material to put in. There's again plenty of links for everybody to follow. But since you are here, may I say, and please give the audience a little heads up on what we're doing. We're writing a book together.
We are indeed. We are taking. How deep do you want to go on it?
Oh, as you wish. Wing it, kid.
Well, we're basically looking at we're applying RJ's source methods approach to creationist paleontology, and we're giving it a big, broad look over. And so it's really interesting stuff already.
I just read over his initial chapter. And in fact, as Jackson knows full well, I apply source methods all the time. And so I'm looking through his material. I've also started the initial draft of the chapter. He wants me to do the radiometric dating thing. So we're going to have a bunch of fun with rate and Vardaman and all the other little gangs. I'm sure if they don't bring it up, I'm going to find a way of bringing in the diamond issue because I really want that on the field.
I'm sure they will. They'll figure it out somehow.
Yeah, I think, well, it was remember, we're riffing off of their 2006-7 book, mainly, the Catchpool 2007 one, because they've done a bunch of different iterations of this thing. I think the first one came out back in the 90 or so, and they've done retreads on it. But one thing I've spotted already on the radiometric dated chapter is that it looks like it's almost identical to the one from the 2000 version. And so there's been very, very little adjustments on it. And what I'll be doing, because I got the two ones to compare, I'll want to see how much variation goes on and how much new stuff is. And of course, how they just don't follow through on stuff. It's going to be fun. It'll probably be maybe as big as Slam Dunk was. And we'll see how long it takes us to riff through the thing. I've not worked in a collaborative thing before, and Jackson may want to start ripping his hair out that he ever thought to do this, where he's collaborating with me, because it's all setting on what kind of margins to use in order to do it as a published book, which is different than the page settings that you do in a standard thing. And my
RJ,
approach.
I was having all sorts of different ideas, very excited ideas, while thinking about this. So it enthuses me to no end to think about doing this sort of thing.
Yeah, well, and he already knows, because he has me vet his various speeches on things, and has given me auctoritas to put in adjustments to his things, although I always do put them in red so he can see them and make additions of things. And I know how you talk and write, so I can slide in there to make it. I want my chapter to be as consistent, in a sense, that it's a conversational style. It won't use conventional footnotes. I think we can work around that easily.
Okay.
All we have to do, the easiest thing to do, is to say, as so-and-so said in their 2007 paper. You put their name up, and if it's a discrete bibliography, they can find it in the references without any difficulty. And I'm converting all of the material that you have that have a link approach, which is perfectly fine for a video linkage, but scholarly context, no, you want to have the standard citation approach on it. And so I track down all that little material. And remember, I'm a geek. I do that effortlessly. It's something that I enjoy doing. A lot of people, it's inconvenient for them to do that. And I'm also compiling an index, so we'll be able to do a full master index on the thing. And that I'll be doing on the fly because, oh, you don't want to try to compile an index after you've written the text.
Right.
Ooh, no, your brain will just fry. I did that for Slam Dunk after the fact, and even as it is, I miss stuff. So I'm going through and creating.
Which suggests that was a bad idea, and you shouldn't do that twice.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because whenever you've got something, especially when you're talking science subjects, it's so easy. In fact, you'll find when I finish my vetting of the first section and then send my version on to see what I've added and adjusted, things that where I realize, wait a minute, you just use a term that I bet your audience may not know. So I put in descriptive things to clarify what the context of that is in such a way. And sometimes I've rearranged paragraphs and things like that, just so that you bring a thing up to the beginning and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Because we want the lay, it wants to function. I tried to do this, of course, it did drive cap nuts that Slam Dunk ended up reading like an official text. But ideally, you want a work that's accessible to the general public, but at the same time, anybody who's really an experienced scientist in that will find it just as useful, that it won't be talking down, that it will be useful and technically accurate and all of that. And so it's a fun juggling act. This will be a more generalized work than I did with Slam Dunk, where I really was aiming at a very technical audience. And so I tended to reference in a science mode in that. So it'll be fun.
Speaking of Cap, it's his birthday today.
Yes, he is. Happy birthday. We can actually sing the happy birthday song because it's now open access. It's the copyright's off of it. So happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, oh Cap. Happy birthday to you. And we refer to him as Cap rather than his actual name because he is anonymous in that respect. Those of us who know the real person know what his actual name is and all that. But he has a public persona.
Do you know the real Cap Brony?
The real Cap. I, by contrast, am an old fart, and therefore I know exactly who I am, and I put myself up as me. I don't use an avatar. I've got my a picture that's not flattering, but then again, all they have to do is to see me live. Would it do any good to put a flattering picture up? I don't think I have a flattering picture.
I think you look just fine, RJ.
Yeah, I am what I am, and I don't have any vanity. And I hope the ideas that I put up are interesting enough that you don't care what I look like.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same. I don't, I don't really care. I also come from a town that's not that large. I'm not entirely worried about it.
Yeah.
I'm not
well,
super
and I can
popular.
easily see where a lot of people, there are a lot of bloggers and others who operate anonymously. Because, and this is even true for anti-evolutionists. There are ones that operate under a pseudonym because if they knew who they were, they might actually suddenly be in a brouhaha over their employment and that. And I can understand where they might have that circumstance. Although, if you're going to say twaddle, you shouldn't be at all surprised that people start going if it works out on that. But the vast majority of people that I bump into in the anti-evolution debate on both sides are ones that are not keeping it locked away as a secret who they are, even if they are operating under a pseudonym.
I mean, for years I was on the internet. I was perusing pro-evolution material, things like that. But I did not comment. I didn't make anything known that I was engaging with any of that material. I did that for years.
Well, I have not been so circumspect. Although I have to say, I was coming on to the internet already with the TIP project organized in my head. I've been doing it for years. So I got onto Facebook, and then I thought, yeah, Twitter. Let's find out about this Twitter thing. And it didn't take me too long to master Twitter haiku, and I had more of a limit to it because it was only 144 characters. And worse, initially, of course, the more people in the string, the more of the characters got used up. And remember, the reason why hello cat, the reason why I was using the whole Twitter platform is because I discovered that an awful lot of creationists have been active on the Twitter platform. They use it as a social medium as well. And if you're going to be dealing with the opposition, you jolly well better pay attention to their contexts. And it has a more open, freewheeling quality about it. And it's linear in a way that Facebook isn't. In Facebook, you get these little boxes that show up, and if you don't really take a note of the box, you can easily lose track of it and figure out what's the current stuff. It's whereas Twitter is all chronological. And remember, I'm chronologically oriented, so I can see the stuff that's come up recently and kind of do it on the fly. But when they expanded, the first thing they did was eliminate, they reformatted it, so now it didn't matter how many people were in the links. That 144 character was a fixed thing, but you could have a bunch of people connected. And you have to remember, too, why I was doing this. I don't follow anybody that's lower echelon creationists. I respond to a lot on them because I've got a bunch of people like Take That Darwin and Take That Science and all that act as my investigators for me. They go out and look for woo, and then they retweet the woo. And I follow them and I go, oh, gee, that's woo. And then I will jump in and have a little comment on it. And the object is not to persuade them. No. It's that there's often a long string of people in there that are critical of the creationists, and then there are pro-creationists involved. And gradually you'll learn some of the names, and you get to see some of them are more trolly than others and pop up a lot. But the thing is that I'm trying to use by example what source methods means. I've been complimented just today on the fact that I don't use ad hominems on people. I don't insult people.
They insult themselves.
I don't have to. I know the data. So I don't need to do that. I don't lose my temper. When some person was just recently saying, that was an ad hominem. And I'm saying, no, it's not an ad hominem to say you don't deal with the science. I observe you don't deal with the science. That's not an ad hominem. It's an observation. I'm sorry.
Yeah. It was funny you mentioned the putting people's names in the tweets. I remember that, and it got to a point where if you had a whole bunch of people in a conversation, about the most you could get out was hello, you know?
Yeah. And that was that awkward. Sometimes I would even avoid responding to certain things because of that limit. But when they changed that linkage factor, and then when they jumped to 280, oh, that's like an open field for me. That's an amazing amount of stuff that I can put into that kind of a context. So the idea is, and here, this is no secret. Anybody that follows will be able to learn about this. And I've used the term with you, an enfilade, that what it's really useful to do is if you are an activist and you want to stir up some knowledge in a spot that is maybe deficient in it, what you want to do is an enfilade, which is you come in on somebody saying woo, and you make a comment about it, about the woo-ness of it and discussion. And somebody else on your side then comes in and comments on your comment. And now you get a conversation going between you two, where the other ones are hitchhikers because they're in the thread. And everybody in those networks, thousands and thousands of people, are theoretically seeing this through their various connections. And you get to talk science data. You get to talk evidence. You get to talk why the woo is woo in this audience. And you're displaying the method. And other people can bring in and deal with. And if one of the wooists decides to criticize, fine and dandy, you use more method in bringing it out. And I think people that follow me, Jackson has been participating in an occasional enfilade. I'll put the little word up on there. And it's somewhere, it can be extremely useful and practical, because you're there not to persuade the wooists that they're wrong. You're there to display sound method. You're waiting to show the path that will work. And everybody following me can make a measure of this. How many people have tried to engage me on the reptile-mammal transition data?
Probably not very many.
As in none. The only times you can get any feedback are ones that, and this has been actually quite a long time ago, when probably 6 months or more was the last one that gave it a whack, where they obviously did a quick Google search and up popped Woodmere, and they throw that, another one threw Doyle at me.
Oh,
and
God.
so, and I already know the material. And so I can then drop the anchor on them without any problem, because they're not doing a surprise. I already know what the data field is. All the other ones, I constantly remind them. I keep track, in fact, of when I mention the reptile-mammal transition, the RMT. I've got it in my little notes. RMT, March the 4th, 2017. And so I can literally tell them I brought this up to you back last year, and you have never responded to it. It's a data field that I don't have to talk about their religion. I don't have to talk about their family or their personal structure. I don't care about what race they are, what sex they are, even technically what politics they are, unless they're trying to pass themselves off as somebody who can think clearly. And when I know they have made stupid statements about evolution, and they have been incapable of reacting on a data substantive point like the reptile-mammal transition. And I got the advantage that I know what they could find and what they can't. If they're an intelligent design advocate and they're trying to deal with the reptile-mammal transition online, they're screwed, because there is no intelligent design discussion of the reptile-mammal transition online. None of the Discovery Institute pundits have done stuff online about it. It's all in their books. And if they haven't read the books, they don't know what that is. And I've read their books, so I know they're wrong too. All the stuff they could find online would be creationist. So Truth in Science, or the Woodmap thing at Answers in Genesis, or Doyle and that at ICR. I think he was at ICR. And it's a small bunch. It's like a handful, literally, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, tiny number of online stuff that they could even throw at me. And excuse me, Reddit, already know you're not going to surprise me. You're not going to sandbag me.
Yeah.
And so if that ain't a book plug for Evolution Slam Dunk, I don't know what the hell is. Because everybody that reads Slam Dunk will literally know the whole data field that anti-evolutionists can throw at you, and you'll know all the data they don't know anything about. You'll learn about a bunch of stuff, and that puts you up on top of the mountain, and you can see everybody coming. That's why I wrote it.
When we were looking at that Creation Wiki article, and you knew the author of the article, even though it was anonymous.
Yeah.
That's because if you're reading up that, you know exactly who did it.
Yeah, because and that's because of the fact that I'm an anal retentive git. Because I had printed out a thing on the reptile-mammal transition back in 2003 online by this guy Krieger, and had it in my notes, and I pulled that together when I was doing the Slam Dunk book. And then only afterwards did I find out about this posting at Creation Ministries that was anonymous, that I recognized, wait a minute, I've seen this before. This is the material from Krieger, that he had revamped it and reposted it. And I already knew that he was one of the people that was involved in Creation Ministries. And the fact that he was referring to I, etc., at several points, there was absolutely no doubt about it. This is Krieger's reposting this anonymously, and I listed it as Krieger 2008 because there's no doubt about it. It's the same person. And he changed very, very little of the text. And when he did change it, it was to evade issues like those little probenignated mice.
Oh my gosh. The stuff. Oh man, it was painful to read. He said Oligokyphus was a mouse.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. It was hard to read.
No, Jackson, run that by me again.
He said so. Oligokyphus is one of those Mesozoic therapsids, and this guy Krieger said it was a mouse.
No.
Yeah, it's the mouse cat.
It would have been more shrew-like.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, he said it was a in the mouse kind, even though if you look at the jaw, the teeth structure, no similarity.
Yeah,
absurd.
Its problem is you didn't get real rodents until much, much later.
Right. Yeah, like 80 million years ago or so, something like that.
Yeah. What was funny about what was really useful about it? Anus the Frog says, yeah, Oligokyphus was a trilodon. Krieger was riffing off of Kathleen Hunt's Talk Origins posting from 1997. So already we're talking 20 years old. And so I felt that this would be a useful opportunity to simultaneously fillet a creationist, because he literally was the only creationist who ever thought to actually try to work out how many therapsid kinds there were, sort of, kind of, but not really. And it was an opportunity to functionally update Kathleen Hunt's postings. I was impressed at how diligent she was, given what was known in the 1990s. It was a really pretty damn good analysis. And in many cases, she was prescient about where the paleontology was going to go. There were no cases where she was just really walking off a gangplank. It was very, very impressive stuff. So simultaneously, that whole section in Slam Dunk is an update of Kathleen Hunt's, and an opportunity to see Krieger crash and burn constantly, because I was pointing out how selective he was. Every single time she was mentioning these double jaw and the vestigial double jaw that was found in these fossils, he never, ever mentioned any of it. He quoted around it. And because we know what was in the original material, he was deliberately avoiding the data field in both the 2003 and the 2008 version. Oh, this is one of the delightful little sections in there. So everybody would have a really clearer idea of what was going on. All we need now are pictures. So, hey, anybody out in Bloggerland, if you know of an editor, a literary editor, a publisher that deals with science material and the like, let them know about my book. Let them know that we need to do a illustrated edition. Christine Janis said that's all it needed to have the pictures attached to it, and it would be college level material because it's really useful. And I would do an updated edition where I would bring in all this new technical material that I've been accumulating in the couple of years since. I've got a box of it, so it'll be updated, and help us on that. I'm still poking around trying to find a potential publisher on there, and it's
RJ?
rough going. Yeah.
RJ, you may want to consider an agent.
Yeah, well, there's the problem, is finding an agent. Literary agents, there were ones, it's like catch-22. You got to be published to have gotten that. You got to get through the door. To get through the door, you already have to be. I don't have a PhD. I'm not affiliated with an academic institution. That was the problem. Jeannie Scott tried to get both the original Troubles in Paradise and even the Slam Dunk, or the 3 Macroevolutionary Episodes book potentially done, but I didn't have the academic creds. And unfortunately, here's where I point out that people with the academic creds have too busy of a life to write what I did, because they wouldn't have the time to be able to have investigated at the level that I did. So, So anyway, Slam Dunk is out there. And, Fino brings up the, look up the 3-knob teeth thing, makes sense. What's really neat, and I allude to it in Slam Dunk, is that paleogenomics, another little word you want to use it because I use it a lot. This is where the science has reached the level where they're retroengineering ancient organisms and biology. I mean, they're not making a dinosaur out of scratch, but nevertheless, they're able to look at the components of a developmental process or a particular chemical receptor system. And they know how divergent it is from 2 very different angles, and then they can retro-engineer it based on evolutionary theory and retro-engineer the original model and test it out in living biology to find out what intermediate effects and so forth it has. They've done that, been doing that for about 10 years or so. Well, they've also been looking at some of the individual components to morphology, and one of them is mammal teeth. And technically it was under the category of rat teeth, where they were retro-engineering the gene switches that produce the cusp shape on teeth. And they were able to retro-engineer about 100 million years worth of mammal teeth. And it includes extinct forms that are only known, I think it's the T2, I call it, because there's tritylodontids, and there's a couple words that are like tongue twister things, and I knew that the reader wouldn't be able to keep them straight because I can't keep them straight. So I call one T1 and the other T2, and the T2 were an example of an extinct tooth form that has been retro-engineered just from tweaking just the 2 genes that were involved in the study. I think Buller or somebody like that is the technical paper in there. Buy my damn book, and you can read all about it.
Been there, done that.
Yeah, so it's the paleogenomics field is yet another one that's one of those bricks that you can throw at anti-evolutionists, because we've moved. When they say, well, you can't experiment, you can't recreate anything, you can't do that, I'm terribly sorry, but they are actually doing that now. And with dinosaurs and birds, they've been doing the foot structure, the digits in the hands, they've been doing feathers, they've been doing the jaw structure, the beak. Muscle attachments, that's another one that's been done paleogenomically. No, bit by bit by bit, as they move higher up into the understanding of the hierarchies of the regulatory systems and what genes are involved and what gene systems are involved, it's only going to get more and more and more evolutionary evidence here, gang. And it's going to look far. of that nothing that's going on in creationism land. Well, we've clearly gone way past our half-hour thing. We're at 6:23.
Actually, believe it
Let
or
me
not,
get some comments from you guys.
hey, RJ, if we keep talking for about another 7 minutes, we'll actually have turned that halfway point that we went way over into the halfway point again.
Yeah, well, I only put up one plug on that. But anyway, so to recap the basic points that I've been making, that how all this threads together in terms of source methods and why it matters. Rupe and Sanford, the creationists who are trying to dismantle human evolution, are reliant on a very restricted data set. They tend to quote mine a lot. Almost half of their material at the moment is stuff that's purely for quote mines. About 20% of the technical citations they do, they're clearly misrepresenting their content. They're overlooking relevant data. They're parsing it very super tightly or making some flat out misnomers. They never really tell you what they think happened. They don't set up criteria for things. And in the case today, they try to use 2 footnotes for the same thing and put them in as separate as though they're different. No, that's terrible scholarship. It's incompetent. And then you find exactly the same problems with your Dinesh D'Souza's, who has this patina of scholarship. He preens at how carefully documented his works are. And I've had Dineshistas come up and say, oh, no, he documents everything, when what they mean is he puts references up. But that doesn't mean he's actually carefully documenting. When you look up the sources, you discover, no, he's relying on secondary sources. He's not fact-checking stuff. He's getting stuff misrepresented. I've done a bunch of videos. Jackson and I did that video on the Margaret Sanger thing together. That you could. I have no respect for Dinesh as a scholar at all. I check his facts. He's terrible at it. And then down in the lower echelon are the Rosanne Barrs of the world, people who have a soapbox because they're talented in many ways. She's funny. She has a tradition. She's brought in with the series again. And suddenly she comes up and then she can give opportunities for shooting their mouth off when in fact they've always been a slipshod thinker. You find that right-wingers can be just as funny as any left-winger, and both of them can be just as incompetent in terms of their source scholarship. And everybody needs to be held to exactly the same measure. And source methods, although it doesn't sound sexy, is the killer app. And source methods is a contact sport. Scholarship is a contact sport. And the more we can make it one, I don't think there's ever going to be a network show on battling source citations. Well, you know, I doubt that's ever going to happen. But at the grassroots level, the more who uses that, Pelagia and Jackson and Crocus Squirrel, you all know, it works. It's the killer app. It's the thing that allows you to not be stupid. It doesn't mean that you're never going to make a mistake, but boy, if you don't follow sound scholarly methods, the opportunity for you to be mistaken goes up. And nobody who believes something that isn't true can show a valid source method when you look at that. They're all screwing up universally. It's the litmus test. It doesn't mean that somebody who has bad source method inevitably believes things that aren't true. That's possible. But everybody that believes things that aren't true are getting Tortugan alerts. And so let's make that a trending thing, Tortugan alert. It isn't so far. And let's make it the thing to do to help out my GoFundMe, if you can.
Just for the record, academia and the sciences has always been a contact sport.
Mm-hmm. Oh, read a discussion in mathematics.
Always
you,
been a
you
contact.
you think it gets snarky between Calvinists and Lutherans. You should see some mathematics people go at
Or
it.
paleoanthropologists.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's hilarious. So it's always been a contact sport. Anything that matters, anything that involves trying to figure out facts, people can get tempers going, especially when it's one-to-one human being. And all science and literature and politics, it's all done by people. So the idea that you can be emotion-free, but that's just nonsense. But eventually, sound method means that you step back and the next generation starts looking at it and the dust is settled and no longer are you fighting the battle because you're not in it, you're looking at the data. And so then they can settle things. And that's how things function in the real world of scholarship.
Hey, gentlemen, I challenge you to sit down at at any meeting between astrophysicists and cosmologists. You will see there will be blood.
Yeah,
Actually,
and it can be both entertaining and
blood
instructive.
Absolutely,
because you can see
how you
can see how the personality cults and things develop. Everything happens that way. I try to point this out. One of the reasons why I maybe think about it more deeply than maybe some have is I think naturally historically. So I recognize that everybody carries historical baggage. I carry personal baggage of the life that I've experienced and the things that I go through. And everybody does that. And too much of what goes on, especially with the younger generation, with the smartphones, where nothing exists before the present. And this historical frame that they need to know, that they may see a pundit that's got a thing online, but they may not realize the background history of that. And to realize that that they should maybe take it with a little grain of salt. And if the more you know about the context of people, look at all the discussion between when people try to use Richard Dawkins and Stephen Jay Gould. Those things pop up all the time.
Did you call me, RJ?
Yeah.
Last I heard, Gould was absolutely horrified that his shit was being used in the way it is by your average creationist.
Oh, he should be. Everyone should be. It is so awful. It's just so awful to look at.
He gets used the same way. He gets sandbagged. He gets quote mined.
There's that.
Paul Ehrlich is another one. Lynn Margulis. Everybody of them where they get RJ, ammunition.
RJ, but Lynn Margulis, she kind of has it coming. She kind of, in some ways, I mean, we're all thankful to her for coming up with endosymbiosis, but after the whole speciation thing, it's like, okay. She was a
wacky genius. She was so long as she stuck strictly to her bacteria world. She was formidable.
Right.
But boy, she just blew things out of proportion. And she was trying to argue that all vertebrate speciation was actually an endosymbiotic thing driven by bacteria. The regular biologists are going, what?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know as much as some people about biology, but I'm thinking, what the hell are you on?
Clay mentions Backer. Robert Backer is another fascinating little character because he's somebody who's very bright and clever, but he's also a loose cannon.
Phytodinosaurian.
He's regarded as a formidable person, and at the same time, wait till he does the technical paper. And so he does occasionally still publish real live science papers, and at that point I go, okay, it's settled good. We'll work with that one, but he's always entertaining. He's thought provoking. He's a bit of a bomb thrower, and so he's always fun to deal with on there. But I know Robert Prothero in his book. You have a copy of that book, Jackson. Look up there. You'll spot a thing. You won't find Backer in the index, but there is a point when he refers to popular paleontologists who put PhD next to their name and don't really have a good a grounding in stuff. He's referring to Backer, who sticks PhD on the back of his name in his books, and that's who he's. That's I instantly recognized it. I go, oh, that's a little bit of a ooh.
We got academic credentials there, RJ. We really do. We need to get on that.
Did you see? Did you guys see? Crap, what was it? The creation is Genesis history.
I have not seen that. I actually intend to here in the next little while.
Okay. Well, at the very beginning of it, everyone that they interview, and I use that term loosely, everyone that they interview in the video, swear to God, it says Georgia Purdom PhD, Andrew Snelling PhD, Jason Lyle PhD. For every single person, it is putting all of their credentials on display.
This is in part a religious apologetic issue, is that the doctor so-and-so, Dr. Martin Luther King, that there is a tradition of authority glossing that pops up. And there are some disciplines that do the same thing. In the medical tradition, if you look at papers at the Lancet or any of the medical journals, they will list their doctorates on those as just part of the course. So there is a tradition of it that you find. You don't find that in the physics community and these others. They just don't bother about it because, you know, you're assuming, and you don't really bother about it. So there are certain nomenclatural things, but it's also creationists want to buff up their credentials. Institute for Creation Research, and for that matter, the Discovery Institute list. Everybody on those Glee Club lists always has to be credentialed. They have to have a doctorate so that they can burnish it and say how wonderful it all is. A side issue that came up involved Jack Horner and the Jurassic Park, and he made a brief appearance in it. I should point out that there's a little thing, and if you want a bar trivia, this is the delicious one, and it's why the dinosaurs are called velociraptors in the story, and it ain't because of Horner. In fact, I think Horner cringed a little bit about it. The dinosaur you're seeing that runs around are Deinonychus, and it's the thing that's about the man-sized. But they're called velociraptors because Michael Crichton was relying on Gregory Paul's not official reclassification scheme. Interesting book. But nevertheless, he was arguing that he wanted to rename the Deinonychids velociraptors, and that was relied on by Michael Crichton when he did Jurassic Park, and that's why they're called velociraptor. Velociraptor from Mongolia is way smaller. I mean, if a pack of them descended on you, you might be worried, but nevertheless, they are not big 6 foot tall sickle cell critters. They're only a couple feet long and much smaller. So
still big
if
enough.
You want to then, that's the reason why they're called
still big enough to make things worry.
Oh yeah, well they were very diligent little predators, and they had a good run for it, and relatively smart. So the science in it, a lot of that was from Horner. Horner also figures in the issue about whether tyrannosaurs were active predators or not, and there is still a bit of a dispute. Horner actually does like the idea that they were the world's largest vulture, that they were largely carrion eaters. And what they could do, if you're a tyrannosaur and you got really good olfactory smell, and you know that something has died because some other predator has taken it down, you come marching in and scare the damn shit off of them in the same way hyenas can drive off lions.
RJ, it's funny you say vulture, because vultures on their feet, they have the scales that are actually feathers that have like secondarily become scales. There was an impression of like some T-Rex scales, I think, near the feet that some people think might be the same sort of thing.
Yeah, there now is a little bit of tyrannosaur skin to work off of, and so at the very least we can say they were not fully feathered. They probably may have had some little feather elements in some areas, and they may have had them as chicks, and they may have had some. I'd love to see if they can ever find an example of a beautifully preserved with skin tyrannosaur arm, as to whether or not they were plumed. I personally think that tyrannosaur arms, and this is just my speculation here, were sexual displays, that they would flex at each other because they're largely functionless. They're not weak, though. They've got tremendous muscles on them, and you would think if they were just a vestigial feature, they would have atrophied away to that. But no, they're like a weightlifter's arm. And so you have the sneaking suspicion they do something, and one possibility is that they're for sexual display. Now, the fact that the arms apparently are comparable on both male and female is an interesting little detail, but we can't always assume sexual dimorphism in relation to these things. We find it a lot in birds today, where often in plumage, the male will have a very bright, resplendent thing, and the female looks dull as dishwater, or vice versa. And you can find a lot of different complexity there. And I suspect the same thing went with the dinosaurs. But the smaller tyrannosaurs, and they have some very small taxa to deal with, those, there's some evidence physically that they actually had feathers on them. So the big T-Rex would be the atypical giant monster on the block issue. And I allude to a bit of that in Slam Dunk, because the feather issue is a kissing cousin to the hair issue because the same genetics are involved. And even though one is in the diapsid line and the other is in the synapse line, BMP, bone morphological protein, and sonic hedgehog and all of that are still showing up as the guidance factors. And ultimately, the fact that in two separate clades, you find warm-bloodedness occurring. And they're both the two most recent vertebrate classes, birds and mammals, occurring independently. And also they have these highly specialized keratin things sprouting out of them, hair and feathers, using a lot of the same genetic systems. Gives you some idea about how convergent systems can develop in biological things. Well, we're well past half hour over the thing here and there, and we're way past our little operation here. We touched on a hell of a lot of subjects. I will remind everybody there's a bunch of links to the various papers that we brought up in here, and by all means check further, find out, look up stuff on Dinesh D'Souza and Rosanne Barr and climate change and Homo erectus and all the other fun and games that pop up in there, and hopefully some of the stuff that you see will be a springboard to do further research and discovery, which is all I love to do. We live in a golden age of science access that and it's why I'm so pissed off at creationists, let alone flat earthers. How dare anybody be a scientific illiterate in 2018 when the information is so easily accessible? It's just plain laziness and bad method that does that. So yes, and thank you, Beej, for thanking us for the time. Any final words, kids?
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to see something absolutely hilarious, get on the internet and dig up any of the debates between Dinesh and Christopher Hitchens, because Hitchens takes the guy apart every freaking time.
Oh yeah, in fact, it was a Hitchens and somebody else. I think it was A.C. Grayling maybe, and Dinesh D'Souza, and I think a rabbi were in a debate. It sounds like, and they go into a bar and blah. But anyway, I think this was maybe 2012, 15, somewhere around in that period. Anyway, one of my favorite Hitchens lines was in response to Dinesh D'Souza, who was trying to trot out the anthropic fine-tuning argument.
Oh,
and
God.
Hitchens distilled it to one of the perfect comeback lines. Dinesh, you're trying to slip God through customs without declaring him.
Yep.
And that one, I can't do better than that. So I tend to quote that line as a perfect put down of the whole anthropic reasoning thing, where they're trying to argue that somehow or other this means the God they particularly worship. Okay, Jackson, you and the cat, do you have any final words before I shut down here?
Buy RJ's book.
I can agree to that. It's a good book, and I need the money.
I had a lot.
Thanks for having me. Sorry I was so late.
Yeah, and so we're shutting down now. There will be another Evolution Hour next week, and Jackson and I are writing a book, and I'm happy that it's warm enough now that I don't have to worry about using the heater fluid down anymore. Okay, thank you all for showing, and tell everybody about the project, and keep using good methods.